Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Hey gang, this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories is brought to you by 3D Comics in Lancaster, New York. If you are a serious comic book collector, just starting out your collection, or maybe you're just a casual reader, then you have to check out 3D Comics in Lancaster, New York. From graded comics, custom art lithographs, limited edition prints and statues, 3D Comics is a must-see for the serious enthusiast, but the laid-back atmosphere is perfect for anyone with a love for comic books and more. They also specialize in custom art Funko Pops, taking regular Funko Pops and having a team of artists do original art on the boxes. Each comes with a certificate of authenticity. Located at 32 Central Ave in the heart of the village of historic Lancaster, New York, 3D Comics is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 6, with special appointments available on Sundays. Find them online at 3dcomicsandmore.com. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. And if you prefer to shop online, owner Joel Sharmani has tons of items available on eBay. Find a quick link to that on the shop's homepage. They also feature in-store appearances from today's hottest artists, special offers, and every Wednesday is New Comic Book Day. Give them a call at 716-860-7837, visit them online right now at 3dcomicsandmore.com, or better yet, just stop on in. But no matter where you are around the round world, 3D Comics is your destination for the best in comic books, custom art, and beyond. 3D Comics and More. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. Tell them Uncle Josh sent you. The Lone Hiker, submitted by Rich. This summer has been a rough one. My wife and I got separated in January, so things have been strange on that front already. We'd been together for 5 years, and it just wasn't working out. No hard feelings. No feelings at all, really. So after being cooped up during the whole pandemic, I decided to take some vacation and do some hiking out west. My brother lives in Oregon, so I thought I'd put in some miles on the Pacific Crest Trail and then hang with his family for a while. I'd been working from home and busting my ass, so my boss totally approved a 2-week siesta. My brother was going to drop me off and then pick me up 5 days later and then drive back to his place in Reading. I hadn't been out on the trail by myself since a year or so before I met my wife, maybe 8 years in total, so I was psyched to have some total shutdown time with 2 books and my notepad. That was it. I flew out, crashed after buying my supplies and packing, and the next day I was on the trail by 8 a.m. My brother said take it easy and was gone, and the first thing I thought of was how quiet it was out there. Perfect. The first day went smooth, and when I stopped for the night, the weather was so nice that I just decided to bivvy rather than put up my tent. I made something to eat, drank a mess of water, read a little, and fell asleep. Beautiful. But during the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not like a bear or an animal of some kind. And I don't believe in that Bigfoot bullshit. It just sounded like a human walking near my tent, just passing by in the middle of the night. After a minute, I convinced myself it was my imagination. It had been too long since I'd been in the woods solo. I just went to sleep and then got after it the next morning. Now here's the strange part. When I would stop for a break or look back to see where I'd been, and it was clear enough, I saw another lone hiker about a quarter of a mile back. I thought to myself, just somebody else out doing the same thing I'm doing. I kept hiking and took another break about 2 hours later. Once again, I was at an vantage point where I could look back and see where I'd come from. I looked back, and there he was, roughly the same distance behind. I thought I'd take a longer break and see if the person wanted to hike a bit together, or maybe just say hi. I waited nearly half an hour, and no hiker came through. I figured maybe he saw me and just wants to be alone, so I got back on the trail until I was going to stop for food and sleep. I kept waiting for the guy to come through, but he never did. Once again, I went to bed under the stars. But the same thing happened that night or early morning. I woke up to footsteps walking by me in the dark of night. This time I sat up and called out, but nobody answered. The footsteps just kept on going. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around, whoever it was long gone. I thought about how weird it was, but wasn't scared or fearing for my life. But it was strange for real. The next day was more of the same. Awesome weather and walking. I kept looking back when I could, but there was no one there. I thought, well, maybe he wanted to get ahead of me and passed me by in the night. But that afternoon, I stopped for some water and to look around, and there he was, about a quarter of a mile back. It was him because he was wearing a bright yellow hat. I shook my head and just kept walking, and then thought, wait, how did I pass him and not see him? Did he hide somewhere off to the side or something? I mean, this was odd. So I resigned myself to stay up that night and see if I could, for lack of a better word, catch him if he walked by. Night came. I was awake. I heard the footsteps. I flicked on my light, and there was no one there, just the sound of feet walking on the ground. Again, not believing in the paranormal or that nonsense, I just sat there wondering what was going on. The next day, there he was again, behind me, clear as day. Always about a quarter of a mile back. I knew there was a road coming up that afternoon I'd have to cross, and I was determined to come off the trail a day early and get my brother to come get me. I wasn't petrified, but I just had this feeling to get off the trail. I got to the road and started heading north to where I knew there was a town about 6 miles away. And then it came to me that I hadn't seen another person on that trail other than that guy. As I thought about it, I looked down the road, and Mother of God, there was the guy walking along the road. I picked up the pace now, feeling uneasy, and I went around a bend in the road and heard a vehicle coming and thought I'd take my chances and try to hitch a ride. Pacific Northwest hospitality came my way. A young guy in a pickup stopped and asked if I wanted to lift. He had a uniform on, and for some reason that made me feel that it would be safe. I just wanted to get away from that other guy. I threw my pack in the bed of his truck, hopped in, and we drove off. We exchanged names and such, and then I asked him if he had seen the guy on the road behind me before he picked me up, the guy with the yellow hat. He shook his head and said, "You're the first and only person I've seen out here today, my friend." I just shot up, and he left me in the town where I could call my brother. I thanked the guy, gave him $10 for gas and his trouble, and we said goodbye. I found a dumpy little motel, got a room, and called my brother to come get me here in the morning. Gave him the address. I got cleaned up, and man, is a shower a nice thing after a long walk. Then I went across the road to a gas station to get some junk food, as the little greasy spoon was not open until the next morning. Each time I crossed the road, I looked up and down, but never saw the guy. As I walked to my room, I stopped in my tracks. Hanging on the door handle was a bright yellow hat. I almost crapped my pants. I took it off the door handle, went inside fast, and checked around the entire room. No one was in the bathroom or under the bed. I slammed the door shut and stayed in my room for the rest of the night. In the morning, I gathered up my stuff, went outside, and the hat was still there. I picked it up, stuffed it in my pack, and got some breakfast and waited for my brother. When he got there, I threw my gear in the back seat of his Blazer and told him the whole story. He just laughed and shook his head. I said, "You don't believe me, do you?" He laughed again, and I reached for my pack. I yanked the yellow hat out and sat it on the console. "You believe this?" He looked at it and said, "Jesus, no shit." You gotta understand, my brother is an uber Christian and never curses, but he did right then. I just threw the hat behind us and changed the subject. To this day, I can't figure out or explain any of this, but I still have that hat. It hangs above my hiking gear in my basement. Thing in the Creek, submitted by Tyler Made. When I was growing up, there was a creek at the end of my street that all of us kids would play in. Right at the dead end of the street, there was a berm, and then some trees, and then you were there. There were big rocks on the banks you had to climb through to get to the water. I think it was some sort of barrier when the creek flooded. At that point, the water there was pretty shallow, and you could see the bottom. It was a rad place to catch crawfish and set up our war zones with our G.I. Joe guys. A little ways down the creek, it got deeper, about 5 feet, and you can fish and swim over there. We had a rope swing, and there was a cleared area on the bank where we would sit and smoke and occasionally drink as we got older and ditched the G.I. Joe guys. You had to take a narrow path to get there, and the branches served as a good distant early warning signal if we were up to no good, which was usually always. Okay, you get the idea of what I'm talking about, I hope. One day, me and 3 friends I'll call John, Keith, and Simon were hanging out swimming and doing teenager shit during that summer break. Talk was usually about chicks and that kind of thing, and picking on one of the 4 of us. And that was the deal. You never knew when it was coming. Someone would decide you were the target that day, and the other 2 would join in and make fun of your mom and whatever. Keith was it that day, and he was spending more time in the water to avoid our wrath as we sat on the bank smoking. I'll never forget his face when it happened. He looked startled and yelled out, "What the fuck?" and started rushing to the shore. He looked really scared. "What's your problem, ass?" I asked, and he said, "I don't know what it was, but something really long just went across my legs, like an eel or something." We stood there for a second, and then all 3 of us burst into laughter. To this day, we still repeat what Cy said, "Dude, that was my dick!" Keith said to fuck off, and I saw that he was dead serious. The guys stopped laughing. I looked into the water, but couldn't see anything as John and Cy asked him if he was serious. "Yeah, it was weird," he said. "It was like a long, thick rope that was like 8 or 10 inches wide. It went right over my shins. I couldn't tell you how long it was, but it was huge." He was really scared, and we all looked into the water. 15-year-olds aren't that sharp. We all grabbed long branches and started poking them around in the water where we could. The creek at this point was about 20 yards wide, so we couldn't possibly get to the other side unless we got back into the water. Nothing was happening, so John started heaving rocks in the water, but still nothing popped up. "Man, I think you're just bullshitting us to get us to stop razzing on you," I said. But Keith was not changing his story. "I'm not fucking kidding," he said. I went over to the hollow log where we always stashed our cigarettes and got 4 out. We sat there shaking our heads at him when on the other side of the creek we heard some rustling on the bank, and the trees went right up to the water over there. "No way," I said out loud. And everyone turned, and we all saw this thick, black thing like a tentacle slide up under a tree from the water, and then pull itself back down under the water. The whole thing took about 5 seconds. Standing there stunned, Cy said, "What the hell was that?" I mean, stupid question. None of us had any idea what the fuck had just happened. After a minute, I noticed we had all stepped back from the edge of the creek without saying anything. "Snake?" asked Keith. "That's one big fucking snake," I said. We did have northern water snakes and copperheads out there, but 1, they don't swim underwater. 2, I've never seen one that big. And 3, I know that snakes don't go backwards like that. That ended our swimming for that day, and we all got the hell out of there. Later, I asked my dad if snakes got that big after telling him what we saw, and he didn't believe me and said it was our imaginations running away with us. That evening, Cy and I went back down there to get the cigarettes, and we were going to a party at another friend's house. As we got there, we saw the same black tentacle-like thing on our side of the water, only out about 4 feet, and it didn't have the head of a snake, just a rounded end. It was going back and forth on the bank, and I said, "Fuck the smokes," and we turned and ran. When we got to the party, we told everybody what we had seen, and this one guy, Barry, said he had some leftover fireworks, and that the next day we should bomb the water and see what happens. Like the idiots we were, we thought that was a great idea. The next day, all 5 of us met and went down there, me in the lead. Whatever it was not out of the water. I mean, we didn't even know if it was in the water either. I ran to the stump to get the cigarettes out, and Barry took out a bag of those big firecrackers, M100s or something. He gave one to each of us, and then, on the count of 3, we lit them as fast as we could, and then threw them into different parts of the swimming hole. One by one, there were flashes, and water shot up into the air, and the loud but muffled sounds filled our ears. A bunch of dead or shocked fish floated up. Yeah, I still feel bad about that. And our idiocy to see this thing, I am sure we violated more than 1 or 2 fishing laws. Idiots. But then something strange floated to the surface. It looked like a black piece of rubber. John grabbed a branch and pulled it over to the bank and then flipped it onto the ground. It was about 1 foot long and maybe 7 inches wide. It was black, but it had dark green stripes, and when I touched it, it felt like wet frog skin. We talked about what it could be, and I'll admit I was a little scared. Was it skin from that thing? As it sat there in the sun while we talked and had a cigarette, it started to dry out and kind of shrink in size. Keith did a lot of, "And at first you didn't believe me, thanks, assholes." He picked it up, and when we all went home, he showed it to his dad, and his dad just said, "Snakeskin," thinking that had wrapped things up. I told my dad what we had found, and he said the same thing. I suppose it could have been, but I really don't believe that. It was way too big for a snake in our part of the country. We never saw it again, but we didn't go swimming there for a while after that. To anybody reading or hearing this, you don't have to believe me, but that really happened. I wonder what it was. Don't Mention Your Girlfriend in Caucasus Mountains by Nate808. I was living in Tbilisi a few years ago, the capital of the Republic of Georgia. I was running a kind of illegal, ambiguous consumer credit operation when I figured it was time I took a much-needed getaway in a nearby small town. The town I settled in is an extremely popular tourist location, given its beautiful location along a river nestled in a deep valley, rife with ancient churches. With many options for potential guest houses, hotels, and rentals, I decided not to book in advance and to just traipse around until I found something appropriate. I found a very adequate guest house perched on a hill with about a 1-acre plot. Upon entering the guest house, I was greeted in typical Georgian fashion by an incredibly hospitable woman in her 60s or 90s. I know it's hyperbole, but the former Soviet Union is like that aging-wise. Her son was there too. He was in his early 30s and resumed his yard work of filling a large hole in. It was a septic tank with a foul lingering smell, and that was our brief introduction. Again, in typical Georgian fashion, the hostess offered me tea, homemade wine, bread and cheese, all of which were much needed and fantastic. I'm an American, but my family came from Eastern Europe, so I speak Russian, as most Georgians do, so we were able to chat a lot. Our conversation progressed from basic get-to-know-you bits to more personal information, like whether I am seeing anyone and who I am dating, which does come up in surprising frequency when you meet sweet grandmothers who want you to meet their granddaughters. At the time, I was dating a fellow expat from a Western European country. When I told the hostess that I was seeing someone, she seemed thrilled and asked me to show her a photo. She reacted with a "ah" and nodded in approval, commenting on her physique in a way that would probably be inappropriate if it wasn't a cute old grandma. I was then pressed by the hostess as to why I didn't invite her and how that isn't what a good boyfriend would do. Put on the spot like this, I lied and said she was very busy with a work project. She wasn't, but she would be arriving later in the evening. Didn't ask. The hostess was elated by this news and called over her son and asked me to show the photo of the girl I was seeing. Early in our conversation, it was established that I do not speak in Georgian. The son saw the photo and nodded and spoke in Georgian to the hostess briefly, and then turned to me with a beaming smile and a thumbs up, and in English said, "Very pretty, you lucky brother." He then asked in Russian if I texted her to invite her. I lied and said I did text her, and reiterated that she was arriving in a few hours. It was around 4 p.m. at the time, and there was a beautiful golden hour glow that lit up the surrounding mountains and valley. The son said he would join us, and asked if I liked cha-cha. Cha-cha is a very strong national liquor of Georgia, ranging from 30 to 75% alcohol content, and made from distilled grapes. I'd become quite the savant of cha-cha, and despite some strange feelings about their fixation on the female visitor, I obliged. Cha-cha is not for the weak-hearted, but I was very used to consuming it at the time. I should have paid more notice to the very intentional placement of the shots he filled for us, but I pushed those misgivings aside and had the shot after a very traditional toast. Around 20 minutes later, I felt exhausted and ill and excused myself to my room, saying I needed a quick nap. Walking to my room, I knew something was amiss. As mentioned in the beginning, I was fronting a questionable business, and I did have a firearm on my bag, and made a mental note to take it and put it under my pillow. But as one can imagine, it isn't easy to remember things even on short term when apparently drugged. Despite failing to collect my weapon, I did close my blinds as the afternoon sun was blaring into the room, and I wanted darkness. Passing out at around 4:30 p.m., I woke to darkness at 4:45 a.m. with a raging headache. My window shades were partially open despite me closing them before passing out. They were open with about 2 feet of space visible to the outside. My bags were not in the position I left them in, and the television was on and on a high volume despite me never using it, and the door was only partially closed. I peered out the window and didn't see anything, so I quickly went to my bag, retrieved my firearm, and went to the bathroom with the intention of calling my coworkers or a driver to pick me up. I had no cell service and no Wi-Fi despite having perfectly fine reception the day prior. I went back to the bed with the weapon under the pillow with zero desire or inclination to fall back asleep. After an hour or so of pretending to be asleep, I saw the sun peer through the window to get a look inside. At this point, I was certain it was not my imagination playing tricks on me and that I was in trouble. I came out around sunrise to find both the hostess and her son sipping tea on the deck, and told the hostess that my girlfriend was arriving soon on a bus and that I'd bring her when it arrived. I grabbed my backpack and left my other bag to give the impression I wasn't fleeing. I got service immediately after leaving the property and called a partner to pick me up. He was an old-school businessman who was floating the money I was running the lending operation with. I told him the story, and he said he would handle it. He did handle it. I still think about the foul-smelling hole the son was digging. Was that their last guest? Weeks later, I decided that wasn't the place or business for me, and applied to law school on the other side of the world. Scarier Than Bigfoot by Anonymous. My brother and I were camping at Mammoth Cave one time, and having an awesome time. On our second night, we were just sitting around the campfire up pretty late at night. We were just telling stories and laughing, drinking some quality bourbon and smoking cigars. We were right off a trail, and that'll be important later. The night went on, and we heard gunshots, and we both looked at each other, and I said, "What the fuck was that? You can't have firearms out here, but you certainly can't shoot them off at night." It wasn't right next to us, but it wasn't too far away either. We both hunt, but when you're just chilling out at night, shit like that startles you. We sat there listening for a few minutes and then started talking again. A while later, we were getting ready to hit the sack when we heard more gunshots, and now we were on alert. A little buzzed, but on alert. The first shots, maybe an accident, right? The second rounds, no fucking way. I didn't want to take it lightly, but I didn't want to go nuts either. I mean, for all we knew, maybe there was a bear that was out of line with some other campers and they were trying to scare it off. I mean, bad idea, but maybe that was what it was. We sat there around the fire embers talking quietly and listening, and not too long after, we heard someone coming up the trail. We both put our hands on our camp knives and waited until we saw flashlights coming down the trail. We both cautiously walked over to it with our mag lights and called out, "Is everyone okay?" A gruff, "Yeah," came back, and through the darkness came a man and his wife. They stopped when they saw us, and we asked if they had heard the gunshots, and the guy said, "Yeah, and we saw the maniac that was shooting." He then told us the story that he and his wife were sleeping and heard shooting, and then someone coming near their tent. It was a guy and his kid, and they said that a Bigfoot had wrecked his tent and campsite, and he was trying to shoot it. I let out a laugh, but the guy looked at me and said, "It ain't funny." He told us to get guns and protect ourselves, that this was Bigfoot country. Then the guy and his kid wandered off. But then a little while later, they heard the guy shooting again and yelling, "I can see it! It's the Sasquatch! Can you see it?" Or something along those lines, so we decided to get out of Dodge. You two should think about it too. I mean, no telling what that idiot might do. They walked off, and we all told each other to be safe. My brother asked if we should leave, and I said no. We just went to sleep, and the next morning packed up and headed for our car and home. At the Trailhead Ranger Station, there were authorities there, and we overheard that the man and woman had called the cops and park officials, and they were asking questions. They stopped us and asked us if we had heard or seen anything, and we just told them what we had heard and the story the couple had told us in the middle of the night. Fucking idiots out there, man. I have no idea if Bigfoot is real, but if you ask me, the real danger is morons who wander around at night shooting at shit, and not one of those things. Little Red Car, submitted by Rachel S. To start this story, I need to give a little background. I live in a very small city in Northern California, 420 people to be exact. Yeah, 420. It's a place where everyone knows everyone. So it feels pretty safe, and growing up there, it felt pretty boring, even though it's filled with beautiful beaches and rivers. I appreciate it now, even though the only other place I've lived in is a rural place in Alaska. I guess I like the country. Let me explain the landscape so you can understand the story better. The whole small city is set on a steep hill. At the bottom, there is a motel, then a gas station, a liquor store, a functioning historic theater that still works on the weekend, which is cool, a parking lot, abandoned buildings, a restaurant, post office, a Pacific Bell building, and then some homes that some, maybe all, were uninhabited. Also, the streetlight would stop after the post office. There was a school I had to pass that was said to be built on a graveyard, but that's not part of this story. I was 17 years old, female, 5'0", and maybe 115 pounds. My best friends co-managed and took care of the motel, so they had an apartment there. I would hang out over there often with other friends, and my soon-to-be boyfriend, husband, then baby daddy. We are still married to this day. I graduated at 17 in 2000, so do the math. One night, it was getting late. I was tired. My future husband usually gave me a ride up the hill. It was only a 10 or 15 minute walk. That night I said I didn't need a ride. I guess I was trying to look independent and show him how mature I was. At the time I was 17 and he was 21. I said goodbye and walked out the door. The street was quiet, and it was after 10, so the liquor store was closed, and there was no one out. I told myself it felt so creepy because I was nervous to pass the haunted school. I swallowed the lump in my throat and began my walk up the hill. As I passed the gas station, I heard a car coming. The weird thing was, the car didn't pass me. It slowed to my pace, and it drove at my pace the whole time I passed the gas station. I kept my head down, knowing if you look, it makes the catcalls worse. By the time I was at the liquor store, he pulled up and did a U-turn, so he parked facing down the hill. I was walking up, but he was on my side of the street. He stopped, and I thought, oh, he must be seeing if the liquor store is closed. I kept walking, and I heard him drive down the hill, but then I heard him turn around back up the hill, following me at my pace. I passed the theater, and as I was doing so, he was still driving the same speed I was walking. What the fuck is with this guy? Yeah, get your kicks, asshole, I thought. As I kept my head down, not wanting him to think I was interested, I noticed he pulled up the hill. Only in front of the restaurant, I noticed he pulled onto the sidewalk. There was a driveway there heading to a park, but he didn't go there. He just stopped on the sidewalk as if to block my way. So now I'm getting nervous. What does he want? Is he trying to snatch me? Should I run? It didn't matter where I went, up, down, left, or right. He could get me either on foot or in his car. So I just decided to play it cool and keep walking. I still had no idea what I would do once I reached his car. I mean, I could run into the park, but that seemed stupid. It was a dark place with no one there for at least 200 yards. Maybe I should run down or keep going. My stomach was in my throat because I knew whatever this was, it was a bad situation. I saw a waitress come out of the restaurant, and my soon-to-be husband worked there, so I knew her. I mean, I wasn't friends with her, but I knew her. I yelled, "Hey! Hi!" She stopped, and the creepy guy in the little red Honda Civic pulled another U-turn and drove down the hill before I reached him. We both stopped and shot the shit, and as we were talking, I noticed this car drive up the hill and turn onto the Ridge Road out of town. I didn't mention anything to her because once I saw him turn up the hill, I figured it was over. I said my goodbyes and walked on. I only got to the post office when I saw headlights coming down the hill and then turn onto the main street. It was him. I kept walking, but this time he pulled over, facing downhill. I was walking up. He pulled over right by me. What does he want? I kept thinking. Nothing good. Oh, great. Here's where I meet my demise. I tried to keep cool, even though my heart was pounding and my hands were numb. As I passed him, parked on my side of the road, he puts the car in reverse to follow me that way. I mean, in reverse. He never said anything. He just stared at me. And at this time, my fight or flight kicked in. I chose to fight. I threw my fists down in the air and screamed, "What the fuck do you want, you fucking asshole?" But I looked up the street and noticed the streetlights will be no more. Should I chance it in the dark or what? I then turned and ran back down the hill, running to the Pacific Bell building. My father worked there, and I'd been there many times. There was a payphone there, and I could call my dad. But alas, I forgot. This was the year 2000, so this was the time they were taking all the payphones out, and there wasn't a payphone there anymore. At this point, the creep was following my every step down to the foot, maybe even centimeter. When I stopped, he stopped. When I went up, he went up. When I went down, he went down. I mean, maybe you guys are all saying, he's just fucking with you. But that cold stare made me know it wasn't just a prank. When I noticed there was no payphone, I was done playing cat and mouse. I threw my hands in the air ready to punch his car, but then I saw another waitress coming from the restaurant. I yelled, "Hey, wait!" and I ran down the hill to address her. She stopped, and as all this was happening, the car drove down the hill and then again pulled onto the sidewalk at the same place he did the first time, right before the restaurant. This time I didn't shoot the shit. I pointed to the car and told her that guy is following me and asked her if she could please drive me up the hill to my house. She looked at the car and said, "Yeah." So I got in her car and went home. I didn't really pay attention to that little red car once I was in her car. The Honda had a really loud muffler. I mean, the sound was something you could recognize. And as I was home laying in bed, I heard that loud muffler sound driving up and down my street. I mean, thank God he didn't know where I lived. The next day I asked around town, "Who drives a red Honda Civic?" No one knew, and to me that is the scariest. It wasn't someone out to scare or fuck with someone. It could have been some psycho from anywhere to try to do anything to anyone, and I was easy prey that night. So my message to everyone is, always ask for help, and always keep yourself safe, and if you have to, fight with every tooth and nail you have. My wife's story, submitted by Brandon C. So I just want to start off by saying I know this is a short story, but it's what my wife has always told me, and it sticks with me. My name is Brandon, and my wife's name is Lauren. We were both born and raised in Clarence, New York. Uncle Josh, note before we go any further, this is a town right next to the town I grew up in. This happened before me and Lauren had gotten together. She had a best friend through high school, and this was just around the time when flip phones were getting really popular with kids, and one of her best friends, I'll call her Kaylee, had a mom who was very strict, because when they were young girls and doing things that young girls tend to do, her mother would lock up her cell phone in a safe that she had kept in her bedroom. One night, Lauren knew that Kaylee had been grounded, so she wouldn't have her phone. It was locked in the safe. At that time, Lauren was living in her parents' basement on Roll Road in Clarence. Your typical basement, not put together. Not insulated, just kind of pipes around, and you can see the floorboards from upstairs and stuff like that. Around 3 a.m., she got a phone call from Kaylee's phone. She was confused because she knew that Kaylee had been grounded, and her phone was locked up. She answered the phone, and a voice on the other end, kind of identical to the horror movie Saw voice, the want to play a game voice, asked her if she wanted to play a game. So she was horrified, understandably so. She hung up the phone, and about 5 minutes later it called back and left a voicemail, so she just ended up shutting her phone off. When she woke up the next morning, she couldn't remember if it really happened or if it was a dream, so she looked on her phone, and lo and behold, the voicemail was there, and both calls in her recent history were from Kaylee's phone. She played the voicemail, and again it was the Saw voice asking her if she wanted to play a game. That day she went over to Kaylee's house and was obviously visibly shaking. Kaylee asked her what was going on, and Lauren said, "Dude, do you have your phone, or did you have your phone last night?" She said, "No, my mom's had my phone for the past 2 days locked up in the safe." So Lauren explained to her what happened and asked Kaylee to please just tell her the truth because she was really freaked out. Kaylee said, "No, dude, I haven't touched my phone. I haven't had it. My mom's got it." Kaylee did have a little brother, so they both went to go talk to him and asked if he snuck into the safe, got the phone out, and played a prank. He said, honest to God, no, he didn't touch the phone. So then they went to Kaylee's mom, and she took them to her room, opened up the safe, and showed that Kaylee's phone was in there, completely shut off. About a week later, Kaylee finally got ungrounded and got her phone back. The 2 calls to Lauren's phone were in her recent history. Lauren had deleted the voicemail when this first happened, so she obviously doesn't have it anymore. I know this is a short one, but it's one that always stuck with me and kind of gave me the chills when she told me about it. Something is Calling My Name by Cosplay Ray. I'm a 17-year-old female, and I'm not new to anything paranormal or cryptic. I grew up watching Ghost Adventures and Fact or Fiction paranormal files. I mean, all total bullshit, but it just goes to show I've always been aware and interested in this stuff. I figured I could share some of my experiences in hopes of getting any advice or answers as to what could be messing with me. I live in Florida, and have always been aware of Native American culture, even though I'm not of that heritage myself. I'm not sure if that's pertinent or not. I timelined all this out and tried to write down everything I remembered about these experiences to give me a guide when writing this. It started from when I was very young, and the first incidence of this happening was when I was living with my grandmother. She and I were very close. This will play in later. I was wide awake in bed, unable to sleep, with her to my right. There's no doubt in my mind that she was deeply asleep for only a few inches away from me. Every television in the house was off, and the only other person in the house was my grandfather asleep in his room. Then very clearly and loudly, I heard my grandma call me from the kitchen. I mean, almost how you'd be called for dinner. I know it's common to hear your name being called mistakenly, but I did more research on this as a teen, and apparently when you hear your name being called out this loud, you're supposed to reject it. I didn't at the time. I mean, not knowing that, I just huddled closer to my grandmother and kept my eyes locked on the open door. The second instance was when I was around 13 or 14, when my grandfather took me on a family trip to Las Vegas. We visited some part of the Grand Canyon, and my family was waiting in line for a skywalk bridge tour. I wandered around the edge a good distance away from my family and decided to yell my name into the canyon to hear my echo. When it came back to me, it sounded distorted and almost like grandmother had yelled back my name. Might not have been my grandmother exactly, but very similar. Nevertheless, just the fact it was distorted was enough to scare me a little. I didn't put too much weight into this experience because it might have just been my voice being thrown around weird. The next one happened when I was 13 or 14 as well. It's the most terrifying one I've had, and every time I tell this story to people, I start to cry or tear up. This is the closest that I've ever been to whatever this thing is, and it proves my point that it's mimicking people I care about. I was on a vacation with my family in Key West, and we had rented a home. I'd invited my best friend, who I'll call Ash, to stay with us, and on the third day we decided to skip out on a boating trip and just mooch off the house owner's Netflix all day. On about the 5th episode of what we were watching, we decided on a snack refill and a bathroom break. We paused the television, and I made my way to the kitchen. I thought Ash had followed me into the kitchen and leaned down the island while preparing some chips with my back turned to her. I held a full conversation with whatever this thing was and even looked back at her on her phone. I fully had no doubt in my mind that I was talking and looking at Ash on her phone. I mean, it even held it in the specific way Ash does. I turned my back for a split second to pick up the bowls and suggested we head back to the couch, when I saw Ash, the real Ash anyway, walk out of the bathroom, which was a solid 30 feet away. My body immediately went cold, and the first thing I asked her was how she got into the bathroom, in and out without me hearing. She then gave me the weirdest look and told me that she'd been in there the whole time since we got up. This is when I started freaking out and insisting that I had just been talking with her and even physically saw her. She joked about doppelgangers and how maybe she was going to die. I quickly suggested we get out of the house and walk around the neighborhood. She then informed me she had just gotten her period while she was in the bathroom the same time I was talking to whatever I was talking to. That was weird. We walked around until my mom called me that she was back in the house. Ash and I are still best friends to this day, and have been for 11 years, and I asked her about it today before I wrote this. She said she didn't hear me talking with anybody at all at the time. At this point, you guys all think I'm probably crazy, but for this next one I have a witness. I felt a little less crazy after it happened with people who freaked out as much as I did. Again, I was on vacation near the Great Smoky Mountains, but just a little west in Sevierville, Tennessee. We had our previous reservations canceled, so we took this little rundown cabin owned by a local woman. We got there late at night, and the moment we all stepped out of the car, the first thing we heard was a man's voice saying, "Hey, neighbors!" coming from a cabin to the left of ours that was higher up on the mountain than we were. We couldn't see the cabin, really just a road that led further up, so we assumed he could see us, we couldn't see him. Probably some guy in his balcony. My friendly stepdad yelled a "Hey!" and we waved up towards the direction it came from. It wouldn't have been weird if this didn't happen every time we stepped out of the cabin or car. My family completely wrote it off as some type of hospitality, and we weren't used to that in Miami. Retelling it, my brother and my friends agreed it was weird. I did hear constant footsteps around the cabin at night, and some outside my window. It was a raised cabin, probably a story or two off the ground. But I don't give this much thought since wildlife is a thing in the woods. Just something I thought I should mention. The thing that really propelled me into researching what the fuck was happening to me was when I was having a photo shoot in the woods behind the cabin, and both my brother, sister, and I heard something calling my name deeper in the woods. Since I was with my younger siblings, I went into full big sister protection mode and almost threw them back down the little slope we had climbed to get into the woods. We were all shitting bricks from how clear it was and how we all pinpointed it was coming from the deeper woods and nowhere near the cabin. This was during the day, and we were all so thrown by this that we stayed in for the rest of our trip. We all agreed it was a woman's voice, and the first thing I asked my mom when we got inside was, "Did you call me?" She'd been lounging in a room with my stepdad all day, trusting that I could take care of the younger ones just outside the cabin. She saw how freaked out the kids were, and we really didn't go out at night for the rest of our trip. I think I reacted this badly to this one mostly because I had kids to take care of, and I could tell they were terrified out there. Again, the voice sounded like somebody was looking for me or calling me back somewhere. With no knowledge of what this could be, I finally decided to look into things when I turned 17. I had no previous knowledge of Wendigos or skinwalkers or anything cryptic, only shitty ghost investigations and Zach Baggins making something out of a scratchy EVP. I'm desperate for answers, because at this point, I'm constantly thinking about it and driving myself into rabbit holes of information, and myths, and legends. I know my writing and recounting may not be good, but I was just trying to get everything and all the details out in a cohesive place. Please let me know what you think of things, and please feel free to ask for more information on something if you think it would aid in you helping me out. Much love to anybody who can. Just a Friendly Neighbor by Anonymous. My story happened about 4 years ago. I was a single mom living alone, and my property is out of town a bit. Not in the middle of nowhere, but not close enough to town for walking distance either. I have a couple of neighbors that I see from time to time, and everyone in my area knows pretty much everyone else. This happened when I was up late one night. I was doing some dishes and cleaning up because my son was in bed for the night. I let my dog outside to roam the property. I have quite a large field on one side of my home that my dog, Goldie, loves to play and run about in. I was just humming along with the radio and washing dishes. I went outside to call my dog to the house. She roams to the far end of the property, and it's pretty normal for me to have to call her in a few times before she bounds up the yard. I saw a small light in the field that I'd never seen before. It looked very much like a flashlight. I was a little creeped out, so I stayed in the lights on my property where my neighbor across the street could see me if he looked out, and it made me feel safer, whether it was justified or not. I called Goldie 3 times, shouting loud because I didn't want to walk into the dark to find her. I waited a few minutes, listening for her paws thumping on the ground, and I did. I also heard a faint male voice from the direction of the light calling my dog back into the field. At this point, I could see her. She was about halfway between me and the source of the light. I was getting freaked out,
But I also have weapons in my house and a knife on me at all times, and I'm not about to let this fucker hurt my Goldie or myself. I shouted at my dog, "Goldie, you get your little butt over here right now." At this point, she realized I was serious and wiggled her little ass over to me, and I rushed into the house with her. I stayed in the house and turned the lights off so that I could see out without people necessarily seeing me inside. I retrieved my handgun from the safe and loaded it and kept it with me as I checked the doors and windows to make sure they were locked. I looked out the window on the side of the house to see if the light was still there. I didn't see it when I looked out the window, and about 10 minutes had passed at this point since I got in the house. So, I put a low light on in the kitchen and started doing dishes again, this time with my gun on the counter next to me just in case. About 30 minutes passed, and I'm just starting to reach a level of calm when I hear a very loud crash in my garage. Now, in my area, the neighbors look out for me, and I look out for them. So at this point, I went into the living room and called the neighbor across the street to ask him if he would look out his front window and see if there was anyone outside near my garage. I told him that I was going to hit the lights in the garage and push the button in the laundry room to open the door. And I have a button on the inside of the house as well as on my car visor. He agreed and seemed super concerned, so I creeped to the laundry room that led into the garage and pushed the button on the inside of the door. The door opening triggers the garage light to come on. My neighbor immediately freaks the hell out. He tells me there is a man in my garage. At this point, I'm just inside from the garage and I have a gun in my hand, so I open the door fast. There is a guy in my garage trying really hard and very stupidly to hide by the side of my car. I slowly started to walk around and had my weapon aimed and ready to fire. As I walked around the car, I said, "I know you're over there, and I have a loaded weapon. You are trespassing on private property. This is my residence, and if you don't leave, I will be forced to shoot you." Like a flash, this guy got up and sprinted out of my garage like a cat with its ass on fire, shouting, "I'm just a friendly neighbor." After that, I closed up the garage and checked to see if anything was missing. It wasn't. I found a toolbox he had accidentally knocked over that caused the crash, and it seemed like his clumsiness got him caught before he could snatch any of my things. I notified the police that there was a man in the area who had broken into my garage. From what I saw, he found a way to wedge the small garage window open and squeeze in. The police came out, asked a few questions, and left. I heard about a guy being picked up for the same type of thing a few days later in a nearby area, but I'm not sure it was him. So, stupid failed thief, let's not meet again. Next time, I won't warn you first. Creepy Camping Encounter by 5M-N3MO. It was the summer night after I graduated from high school. A good friend and I decided to try our hand at camping. We grew up in the greater Los Angeles area, so our knowledge of the great outdoors was nothing beyond the couple of years we had in Cub Scouts when we were in elementary school. In other words, we had almost no idea what we were doing. We packed a tent, a couple of sleeping bags, supplies, etc., and then headed off in his car. Note that I grew up in the 80s, so this is a time before the wide prevalence of cell phones and the existence of other portable digital devices. We drove north on 395 for about 6 hours and then headed westward into the mountains in the area of Inyo Canyon. First mistake. We didn't plan on which place to camp. We played it by ear, like fools. Second mistake. We left in mid-afternoon. It was pitch black darkness when we arrived in the general area. We had driven off the main road and onto a dirt road in order to find a spot to camp. The dust from driving on the dirt road overwhelmed the headlight high beams when we finally decided to pull over and set up camp. It was around 11:30 and we were exhausted and famished. Any place was a good spot to camp for us, given our only reason to do so at that point was our hunger and exhaustion. Third mistake. We didn't bring any flashlights. We only had Bic lighters for our cigarettes. We tried to set up the tent using our lighters and the headlights of the car, which was parked about 10 or 15 feet away. The wind was blowing, so the lighters constantly went out after a few seconds, either directly because of the wind, or indirectly because the wind would push the flame into our thumb. Clearly, we were being complete idiots. We finished setting up the tent, but at that point I was too tired to eat. My friend managed to make some instant ramen, and we smoked a cigarette in the car and then crashed out in the tent. We awoke to a very cold morning. It must have been around 5:30, and immediately upon exiting the tent, we realized that we were camped at the entrance of a hiking trail. There were at least 2 no camping signs in visible distance from us, so we dismantled the tent, cleaned up, and cleared out. That morning we ended up buying some cheap flashlights and a nice hot meal in a very small town. It wasn't really a town, but more like a few storefronts and shops on a main road, about the length of an average city block. We went into some office, though I don't recall exactly what it was. It might have been a park ranger station or the office headquarters for a campground. In any case, we found and reserved a site for the night. The campground was basically like a large circle with campsites along its outer circumference, with each campsite being about 50 yards from its neighbor. In the middle of the circle was a common bathroom and shower. We circled around it once, and I think we saw one family that was all set up with a tent and camper. We found our spot and set up camp, which was quite far from them. That night was when we had the creepy encounter. My friend and I were laying in the tent, shining our flashlights upwards and chatting. Our new flashlights eventually gave out. Yep, broken. Our fire pit was about 6 feet from the opening of our tent. It was just a glowing ember. We probably should have completely put it out, and we probably shouldn't have had the tent so close. In any case, there we were, chatting away and having a good time. My friend began to be distracted with his foot, and after the 3rd or 4th time he got up to check it, and I asked him what was wrong. He told me that something is tapping his foot from the outside of the tent. His foot was along the side of the tent, so from the outside you would have been able to see a bulge in the tent side where his foot was. It was as if pebbles were being thrown at his foot through the tent. "There it is again! What the hell?" he said. Each time it happened, there was a sound like pebbles or a light tap. We sort of laughed it off, assuming that it was a twig or grass moving in the wind, or perhaps a loose strap on the outside of the tent. I don't recall exactly how it happened at first, but I do remember we suddenly became silent at the same time. The sound came to be audible to both of us. Footsteps slowly moving towards our tent. We wondered if it was a bear or other non-human animal, but it seemed distinctly bipedal. They were very slow and measured. Like a step every 2 seconds. I finally said in a whisper, "Someone's coming." My friend didn't move. His face had an expression of fear. At some point my friend bolted up and said, "Fuck this," and he grabbed his pipe, stuffed it full of pot, and took the biggest, deepest drags I've ever seen a person take. About a minute or 2 later, he was out. Drugs aren't my thing, so now I was alone in the tent as far as conscious bodies are concerned. I was sitting up at this point, and I had taken out the only weapon I had, a Swiss Army pocket knife. I took out the big and small blades, as well as the ice pick in the middle, and held it like some kind of ridiculous melee weapon. I could see the glowing embers in the fire pit through the sheer nylon material of our tent, and I was able to roughly but barely discern some of the rocks around it. I watched and listened intently. The footsteps came closer, and at the same slow pace. With each step, I could hear the dirt and rocks underfoot crunching and grinding. At some point, it was clear to me that whoever it was standing between the tent and the fire pit, for my fuzzy line of sight to the burning embers through the nylon tent became obscured by something outside the tent. The footsteps stopped right at the front of the tent, about 6 to 8 inches away, no more than a foot. It was silent for about 1 minute, and then I heard a click. At exactly the same time, I clearly saw through the nylon tent wall a flashlight turn on. I was able to not just see the flashlight, but the outline of the hand holding it. The flashlight was shining on the zipper entrance into the tent, just inches from it. Blood drained out of my head, then my palms instantly became dripping in sweat, and I yelled, "Who's there?" There was some fear in my voice, but it was mostly aggressive in tone. And whoever it was, the person immediately turned off their flashlight. I didn't move, but neither did they. The person just stood there, inches from the tent's only entrance. My friend is out, totally unaware of what's going on. Nevertheless, I pretended that he was still awake and whispered just loud enough to be audible to our visitor. "Yeah, loaded. There's one in the chamber," as if my friend was awake and asked me about our gun. Okay, fourth mistake. We didn't have a gun or any real weapon for self-defense. It felt like an eternity, but after sitting still for at least 10 minutes, I heard the feet slowly turning in the dirt, then slowly walking away from the tent. I stayed up the whole night, and it wasn't until the light of dawn came through the tent that I crashed out. The heat inside the tent woke us up, and it was near noon by this point. We went outside to inspect the site but found nothing missing. However, we did find boot prints leading away from our campsite and outside the campground. That was the last time I camped in a tent.
A Big Mistake, submitted by Beans Franklin. When I was 20 years old, I made a huge mistake. Yeah, there's no ghosts or anything like that in this. I hope that doesn't bother you. My buddies and I went to a strip club like many young bucks do. Truth is, the places are pretty sleazy, but I guess it was some kind of rite of passage or something. I'd broken up with my college girlfriend, and I'm not going to say going to the strip club wasn't fun, because it was. We would laugh, buy each other lap dances, get drunk and silly, the whole 9 yards of sleazery. It's not like we were there every weekend, but once in a while we'd go out and throw away our money. Anyone who says those women don't offer more than just a dance is kidding themselves. Some of the women at this one club would do things right out in the parking lot, or even arrange to meet at hotels after they were done working. One night, we decided to go out. I'm from Canada, by the way. The drinking age is only 19 up here. We hit up that sleazy club before going to a dance club. It was kind of a warm-up. My friend bought me a lap dance, and basically the dancer will come over and touch your shoulder or whatever, and then lead you to a room with private booths. You sit down, they do their thing for however much you pay, maybe 2 or 3 songs. You get a useless hard-on and then go back to your buddies. Like I said, some go a little further, but that never happened to me. Until this night. Long story short, I got a lap dance, but this girl was different. Yeah, she had all the right moves and looks, long legs, really pretty in that slutty way, and please don't think I'm a bad person or sexist, I was just a kid. And she had more than a decent body. Her name was Trinity, and of course that's not really her name in real life, that was her stage name, and that's what I'm going to use here. Something was in the air, because she stayed with me longer than 3 songs, and then said she would stay longer, but she had to go on stage. She kissed my cheek and whispered to stick around at the end of the night. I had no girlfriend. I was a little tipsy and more than a little horny. I told her I was going out with my pals, but I could come back, and she said she really wanted me to. When we got to the other club, I told my guys, and they all did the high-five, stupid, "You're the man" thing. And please, they all had girlfriends. I had a right hand at that point. We had taken 2 cars, so they all crammed into one at the end of the night, and I went back to the strip club. Things were wrapping up there, and Trinity saw me, waved, and then said something to the bouncer. He looked at me and gave a thumbs up, so I went to the bar and ordered a last call beer. The bartender looked over at the bouncer, and they both gave each other a thumbs up, which basically meant I could stay after hours. A couple of minutes later, Trinity came over in street clothes and sat down. She had a drink and we talked, and she told me her real name and asked if I would take her to breakfast. She'd gotten a ride there with one of the other girls. We went to this all-night diner place, and I couldn't believe this was happening or that I was actually doing it. We talked about all kinds of things, how she hated dancing but the money was so good and it was putting her through college, which was really true in her case, and she was no bimbo. She said it also made it hard for her to have relationships, but she really wanted one. It was a totally innocuous date, I guess you'd call it, and we just had breakfast. Finally, she asked me to take her home, and when we got there, she gave me a kiss, her phone number, and said if I didn't think she was a whore for doing what she did for a living, to call her that week. I did ask her if she slept with other guys from the club, and she said no, and that she'd actually only been with 2 other guys in her entire life. I believed her. A few days later I called, and I said maybe we could go to dinner. Well, dinner wasn't the only thing we did, and it was the beginning of our relationship. But as time went on, well, you'll see. We clicked right away, and we saw each other a lot, but I told her I was not going to see her at the strip club. She was happy about that for more than one reason. She said she'd be embarrassed about it, but what she didn't tell me, well, I'll get to that in a little bit, and you'll see why. Had I known what she should have told me, it would have saved me a whole lot of trouble. One night, after about a month or two of dating her, I got a phone call. It was a male voice and asked if I was Gary. I said, yeah. And the guy lost his shit, saying he was going to cut off my balls, bash my head in, everything short of kill me. And then when he stopped yelling, I finally said, dude, who is this? And he just said, I'm coming for you. And then he hung up. I didn't know what to think. I didn't have any enemies. Maybe it was the wrong number, I guess, so I just let it go. I fell asleep, and when I woke up, there were 35 texts on my phone saying the same kind of things. So I texted back, saying, I think you have the wrong number. And the person immediately texted, oh, I know who the F you are. You're a dead man. I tried calling the number, but no one answered, and there was no voicemail. I didn't know what to do. I just got on with my day. But every once in a while, another threatening text came through. I finally called the company and told them what was up, but they were pretty much useless. When I got home from work, I called Trinity to see if she wanted to get together that night, and she said she wanted to stay overnight at my place. Fun for me. We had dinner, and then my phone rang. Same guy. She heard the threat this time, but didn't say or even ask me what it was about. She just distracted me, if you get my drift. We fell asleep, but I woke up to the sound of what I thought was a gunshot. I sprang up and went out into my living room of my apartment, and someone was kicking my front door in. I ran to get my phone and back to Trinity, forgetting to grab my shotgun from the hallway closet. I shut the door, grabbed my phone, and just perfect, it was dead. Whoever was at the door had obviously gotten in, as I could hear heavy breathing and stomping around. Trinity started talking, and I held my hand up and told her to be as quiet as she could, and then motioned her to my bedroom closet, thinking maybe we could ride this out if someone didn't even know we were home. The closet is pretty deep, and I was hoping that we could both hide under some clothes and my winter sports stuff. For a minute, I was hoping my neighbor would hear everything and call the cops, but then I remembered he took a job way out in the middle of nowhere, and his side of the duplex was empty. So we just hid and listened to the bedroom door slam open and the heavy breathing come into my room. It was definitely a guy, and he was talking to himself out loud and kept repeating, "Effing dead, man, effing dead." He opened the closet door, and Trinity held on to me tight. My plan worked, because he didn't come in. We heard him punch the wall and then leave the apartment. After 5 minutes or so, we slowly got out of the closet, and in the light coming through the window, I saw a big knife stabbed into my pillow and a huge hole in the drywall where the guy punched it. I plugged my phone in after cautiously going out in the living room and grabbed my shotgun from the closet. I called the police, and they came out and saw what happened. Right before they got there, I heard Trinity whisper, "Oh, God, again." I don't think she thought I heard her, and before I could ask what she meant, there was a cop in my doorway. I put the shotgun down, making sure that they knew that I wasn't the intruder. Another cop showed up, and I told him the whole story, including the phone calls. He also informed me that my windshield on my car had been smashed in, and the air was out of all my tires. They took the knife and then took a lot of pictures on their phones and said they would be back after talking into their radios. The door jamb was jacked up pretty good, but the door did close. One of them told me it would be a good idea to stay somewhere else that night, and I agreed. The crazy guy might come back. I left a message with my landlord about the door, left another with my boss telling him I was taking an emergency day off, and we went to Trinity's place. On the way over, I remembered what she had said, and I asked her about it. And she just said, "Oh, nothing. I was thinking about something that happened to me when I was a kid." I was too keyed up to push it. It was about 3 a.m, and we crashed on her bed. I woke up about an hour later to a noise in her bedroom, like someone walking very quietly. At first I thought it was Trinity, but then I felt a massive punch to my face and I saw stars. I mean, it actually knocked me off the side of the bed. Trinity woke up, screamed, and I heard a slap and a guy's voice say, "Shut up, you bitch." I tried to get up, but was immediately hit again in the back of the head, and I fell back down. I'm not a small guy, mind you, and I'm very fit, but when you're getting sucker punched from behind, you don't have a lot of recourse. When I did get back up on my knees, I got a real quick look at the situation. Trinity was being held by some guy, and he had a hand over her mouth, and this other big guy jumped on top of me and started choking me out. I'll never forget that awful feeling of fighting to stay awake, and it sounded like the voice that was saying, "You're a dead man," was like a mile away. I could hear Trinity struggling too and thought, oh man, is this really it? As I started to pass out, I heard another loud voice yell, "Freeze, get on the ground. Now, let the girl go, get on your knees." There was a lot more shouting and a lot of swearing and stuff, but the grip on me loosened up. I took a huge breath and then puked on the leg of the guy who had just almost killed me. I opened my eyes to the light in the room, and the two RCMP guys from earlier were there and yanked the two guys to their feet and took them out of the room. One of them came back, asked if we were okay, and then said he was calling for an ambulance. Alright, this is already super long, so I'll skip all the questioning and stuff. Yeah, the guys went to jail. I have no idea how long they're going to be in for, but they got pretty decent sentences from what I know. That night I got checked out by the EMTs. I had some serious bruising around my neck, but was more freaked out that I could have been killed. Well, I got the real story this time. The guy was Trinity's on and off boyfriend, and the other guy was the bouncer from her club. This on and off guy had found out about me and happened to be friends with the bouncer, and threatened to beat her up and do some really vile sex acts to her, and then beat me with an inch of my life. The RCMP guys asked why she hadn't reported anything, and she said she was really afraid of him. I looked at her like, how the heck could you not say anything or tell me? I mean, for crying out loud, I could have called them myself. When it was all over, the EMTs gave me a thumbs up to stay, but asked me to follow up with my doctor the next day. The police would be coming back. When they left, Trinity kept saying she was sorry over and over and over and that she'd been stupid. That was the first time she told me that she loved me that night. I just looked at her and shook my head. I almost died, and it could have been avoided. Finally, as keyed up as we were, I hugged her and kissed her, and we fell asleep on her bed. That morning I woke up before she did. Sunlight was streaming through the window. She woke up when I stood up and was getting dressed. And I looked at her, leaned over, kissed her again, and said, "Goodbye, Trinity." And that was it. I left, walked back to my place about 2 miles away. She called me once a week later and wanted to reconcile, but I told her it was better to just let this go. I was terrified if these guys were ever going to get out and come back for me, and as much as I liked her, I wasn't in love, and I didn't want to put my life at risk. I only saw her once after all this at the movies. I was with my then-girlfriend, now wife. I had never told her about what had happened. Trinity was with some guy and walked by, and she saw me and said hi, and I said hey. My girlfriend asked, "Who was that?" And all I said was, "A big mistake." Sleazery. Oh, that's awesome. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to hear narrated on this channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Special request for Halloween stories as we're getting to that time of year, and I can't wait to see what you guys send me this time. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and something that has come to my attention from a bunch of listeners is make sure that you hit that notification button or turn it off and turn it back on to make sure that you get updates when I do upload. If you are interested in hearing this in podcast format, I am all over the place there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and many other formats. If you'd like to take it a step further and support the channel, please find me on Patreon.
All the links for that and my social media are in the description below. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, be excellent to each other. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and most of all, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.